All right, so we've got experience over here, so if I make an error, he'll probably raise his hand and correct it. But usually when people are new, I like to start the class and try to explain really what real estate's all about. And you really only have one job in real estate, and you just have to figure that out early on, and it's lead generation. I mean, that's what it really is. Because it doesn't matter whether you can fill out a contract or not, or a buyer's agency, or a compensation writer. If you don't have any client, you're skilled, but there's no talent there, you know. Some of the best people we've ever, over the 20+ years that I've been in it, recruited, you know, they call me their first day that they got their license and we signed them up, and they'd be say, hey, I'm writing a contract, you know. It was that kind of they just went out and did it. But it was lead generation. So, you know, obviously you've gone through some of the classes, you talk to some of these people in the staff and things like that about lead generation, but it's your sphere of influence is where you start. I mean, unless you're just brand new to the city, you know, there's somebody in your group that will buy something or sell something. And you have to look at it like just basically like a wheel, and that there's 10 people, you know, and then even me has 10 people that I know that if they were going to do business, they try to do business with me. But to make that work, then you got to do such a great job of those 10 people. Each of them has 10 people also out there. So you really got 100 potential clients sitting in your database, and your database is sitting right here. I mean, we went to a class a couple of years ago that was a Keller Williams class, and the guy came in and says, you know, how many contacts do you have? You know, how many people you stay in touch with? And then he asked, you have a phone? He said, look in there and see how many contacts. That's your database right there. Because if they wouldn't be in your phone if there wasn't something there. Now mine, I have to be careful because some of them are dead. You know, I've been in it too long. And every once in a while I'll scroll through. He's been gone a while, you know, I probably ought not to call him. But really, lead generation is where it starts. Sphere of influence is the best. Do open houses if you get a chance, if you can ever do them. People say a lot of times it's just lollygaggers or, you know, lookers that come in. If you're gonna take the time to stop at a house and walk into a house, you got some kind of question about real estate. You have some kind of interest in real estate, and that's why you do it. So I've never discounted those. And then now I think if you were in the meeting the other day, Shanna mentioned that the January 1st, there'll be 150 expired listings. Don't be afraid to call them. And here's the reason. Number one, they're not on the do not call list because they've already been advertised, especially if they have the owner's name and number there. Two, they didn't sell for a reason. What was most likely the reason? Price. Could be condition, but price is the most likely reason. And I always used to call people on expires. I used to do that all the time. I love talking to expired. And they say, well, you're the 15th person to call today. I say, well, that's disappointing. And they'd say, why is it disappointing? I said, there's 2,000 agents. And there's only 15 of us care about it. You know, the fact that you were trying to sell your house and you didn't. And then I would say, my script is always the same. You give me 15 minutes and I can tell you why your house didn't sell. You know, have you got time today? I can do it tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. And I go over there, I do all my research first, of course, and have a CMA ready. But I go over there and I drive up and they got a car on blocks in the yard. Or, you know, the siding's falling off of the house. Or I get there and it's a really nice house and it's in good condition. But my CMA says it should be $30,000 or $40,000 less. You know, and I just sit down with them and I do what we were talking about earlier in the class, before the class started. I say, look, before we can do anything else, walk me through the house, show it to me like you'd show a buyer if you're going to do it. And then if I find anything, I just stop and let them explain, you know, how they're going to fix it or what they're going to do, because something's got to be done. But then, by then, you know, you've hopefully established some rapport with them and they have some trust of you. And then I sit down and say, you know, here's the reason, in my opinion, that you didn't sell. And it's this, this, and this, or it's, you know, the car on blocks is not a good look for your house in this neighborhood. You know, it really needs to be gone. Well, it's my brother's car, blah, blah, blah. You know, it needs to be gone. I mean, people are going to pull up and they're going to discount your property already. or they're gonna drive the neighborhood and see it and go, nope, I'm out of here, you know? It's pretty simple, but expired, don't ever shy away from them. And it doesn't matter how many people have called them. And it doesn't matter if you're the newest guy on the block or if you've got 20 years of experience. If you'd use that script I use, I mean, it'll get you in the door. And if you get in the door, you know what the National Association of Realtors says? First person in the door, what percentage gets the listing?
Imagine the tie, I don't know that.
76 to 80%. First person in. Same thing on an expired. You know, they wanted to sell, it didn't sell. They still want to sell if they tell you that. Yeah, and then you get in there, if you're the first person in there, you've got a 75% chance of getting the listing, unless you're just, you know, you walk in shorts and flip flops and a t-shirt, like some of our agents do. I mean, please don't ever do that. It's just not.
I don't own any flip flops.
Yeah, I tell you what, but I see people all the time. I mean, I go to the Catholic church over here and I see people going in there and I know God's pissed off when he sees them, you know? He's like, you know, come on, I died for you on the cross and this is how you dress. I'm just kidding. Up there in that world. That does upset me. Other little things that I shouldn't say that. I guess. All right, the residential sales contract, again, your only job is to fill it out. You don't have to be an attorney, you don't have to be a broker, you just got to fill in the blanks, but you've got to know the contract well enough to be able to paraphrase it to your clients. You got to be able to say, they say, what do you mean? What's this title stuff about? You've got to be able to tell them basically. And then as far as filling it out, she talked about scroll over the thing or whatever in DocuSign, it says first name, last name. You know, that's not it. Because it could be first name, last name. It could be James L. Bolin, but it could be James L. Bolin and Chris L. Bolin, or it could be James L. Bolin, AMP, a married person, because I could buy a house by myself, just state of Missouri, I can't sell it by myself. It could also be Kelby Lane Incorporated, which is just a corporate name. That's fine. It could be a trust. The James L. Bolin and Christine L. Bolin irrevocable trust, revised January 26th, 19th, whatever, you know, that could all go on that line as the buyer. So you can't think of it as just an individual or just a husband and wife. And over the last few years, we've got a lot of couples that have bought houses, and it could be James Bolin and Susie Smith, not married, but they're buying it. Or it could be some of the couples we're seeing now, James Bolin and John Jones, and not married. So it can't just be first, last, you know, you've got to think about it. And so you need to ask your buyer when you're working with them, how do you want to take title to this property? And they'll tell you, like, if I buy an investment property, I want it Kelby Lane Incorporated. I don't want to go in my name, even though I have to sign, but I want it there. And a lot of them will say, well, we want it in our trust, you know? So make sure that question is asked first. How do you want to take title? And they say, what do you mean? Say, well, you know, how's it going to be titled on the warranty deed? Okay. Good with that. The next section on the street address, it used to, we really had a lot of trouble making sure that we got the legal description in there. We don't have to do it anymore. The state has kind of said, look, in attorneys, we want the street address, but the key to that is, and that's why I like to have a live contract up here, is like I live on 2455 East Delana Street. That modifier at the end is really important to the government, especially on government loans. Street, circle, cul-de-sac, drive, road, avenue. If you don't put that on there and they do a search right before closing and it comes up as something different than the contract, your contract will be delayed. Your closing will. City, obviously, zip code and county, you've got to get that in there. One of the things they dropped, and since you're new, you wouldn't notice, is municipality. They used to have it up there, you know. We don't have any municipalities around here. I mean, if you're in St. Louis or Kansas City, I think they have them, but we don't have any. We just have towns or cities. On the legal description, if you're doing a property that's got acreage, I'm telling you, you better look at, see if you can get a legal description, even if it's meets and bounds. You find that in the CRS tax records a lot of times. But if it's a 5-acre parcel, the first question you ask is, do you have a survey? And has it been recorded? Because that's what you'd like to have. And if you do have that, then you check the box, then you must attach the document as part of the contract. And it needs to be initialed by all parties, buyers and sellers. Okay? And if it's being broken off of a piece of property, and we see this quite a bit in the Ozarks where somebody says, you know, I want to sell 10 acres of my 40 acres. Then you've got to put in the contract, most likely, that if the seller hadn't already agreed to do a survey, I'd write in special agreement, seller agrees to complete a survey. Now, there's actually a survey writer now, so you can put that in there. But who pays for it is the key to that. And you want to get it done prior to closing. And it's probably going to be 45 days minimum to get a survey done. All right, we buy the thing, the purchase price for the property paid by buyer. Here's one of the things that newer agents or agents, you're going to have to learn. You don't set the price, the buyer does. So, you know, we've got a little house listed there, and we've got a couple offers on now, and it's listed at $149, I think. So if you were showing that house to the buyer and he said, look, you know, it's been remodeled and all of this and all this, and said, okay, you know, I want to buy it, you know, and they say, how much should I offer? And what you've got to be able to do is tell them, here's information on this area, and this is what houses in this market are going for. And so you have to determine the price. If they say, well, I want it. Well, so if you want it, then you probably need to do what? Pay full price, okay? Well, in this case, they wrote an offer that said $154,500, even though it's listed for $149. What they did was they came down to concessions, and they need seller concessions to help them offset the cost of their loan, which is really expensive. It's like 2.5% is kind of a minimum, 2 to 2.5 is minimum. So if they're going to borrow 150, 2.5%, around 4,000, but they put in here 4,500. Let me get the right number. Anyhow, as concessions. And again, those concessions, when somebody asks for concessions, I always tell them, I say, look, you know, let's say the husband's working at Walmart and he's making $15 an hour. And the wife's working she's a paralegal and she's making $15 an hour. So 80 hours a week times 30, $2,400. Sounds good, doesn't it? Is that right? Sure. Yeah. Okay. The problem with that is, and you take it out for the full month, it looks like they're making a ton, you know, at 90 or $8,000. But if you throw in there a car payment, maybe 2, maybe a student loan, and if they got kids and they're paying for childcare, I mean, that's $1,000 a month, just about anywhere. And you go on, and that check's not that much. So a lot of times they've been able to save, for example, on an FHA loan, the 3.5% for the down payment, but they don't have the 3.5% or 2.5% that's going to be needed to offset the loan cost. So they ask for them for concessions. And in this case, the example I'm giving you, the buyer's agent says, well, let's add those on top because this house is a good value. So they added them on top, and now the seller is going to get full price for the house. He's just got the concessions involved, and they'll be taken out only at closing is when they're taken out. You're going to see at some point, maybe, I don't know anymore. It's hard to say. Sometimes they don't pay commission on the concessions, but I don't know where you'd write that anymore. You couldn't put it out there publicly because you'd have to use the word compensation or concession. So I guess it's just going to stay in there. So that's what you get paid for, though, when you write the contract. In your mind, you're thinking this, what you should be thinking as a good agent, 149, round it to 150, that's $4,500 in commission. So I'm going to get this deal done because I need this $4,500. And I'm gonna do another one because I need that 45. I mean, the point is that this is what you automatically, you've got to measure that in your head and say, you know, this is why I'm working. I'm not working, you know, to entertain this customer, this client now. And then earnest money, again, I wish we had that live contract, but we don't. You don't have to put any earnest money down for it to be a legitimate contract or considered a good contract. The contract itself is considered goods. So you don't have to put any. The problem with earnest money is if for some reason we go 3 weeks into this contract, there's an inspection issue and the seller won't fix it, or seller won't fix it to the satisfaction of the buyer, and the buyer determines that they're not gonna close the contract, then the earnest money has to be released. It requires a document called a mutual release of earnest money. Now, both parties have to sign. Well, the seller is upset, aren't they? You're not gonna close? I want that $500. But the buyer says, look, I didn't do anything wrong. I followed the terms of the contract. I just asked you to fix some things. You're not gonna fix them. I should get my money back. Seller goes, I don't care what you think. I'm not giving it to you. Buyer goes, I really want it bad. So what happens is it sits in escrow at a title company and it can stay there for up to 365 days. At the end of 365 days or before that end, if we haven't reached a decision and the release hasn't been signed, it goes to the state Secretary of State's office and it goes into unclaimed funds. Guess when it comes out? When H freezes over. Unless you send a notarized letter from the seller and the buyer that says, we've reached a decision on how to distribute this money. You send that to the Secretary of State's office, they send the money back where? Title company. Title company. Guess what happens then? You got to have a mutual release signed by both parties. So earnest money is really something we fight over quite a bit. I mean, and brokerages have this discussion a lot. Fortunately, we don't have a title company. So if you're writing this contract and your client wants to put in earnest money, it needs to go to a title company. Okay? Every title company's got an escrow account. So if you choose one, that's where it goes. Earnest money shall be delivered to by buyer to, and this is where you put in the title company that you're going to deliver the earnest money to. It says 5 days. Don't put that. Put 10 in that blank if you're going to write the contract. Because 5 days can run up on you quick. Like, for example, next Tuesday is Christmas. So you write the contract on Sunday, you know what's going on. You're gonna have Christmas Eve, you're gonna have Christmas and so on. You can be done with your 5 days really quick. If it's not deposited within 5 days, then the seller can terminate the contract without penalty. Just say, sorry, earnest money's not there, contract's terminated. So 10 gives you time. It used to be easy because everybody ran around with a checkbook, right? Yeah, I still do. There's one in my truck. But not everybody else does. Now you can deliver most of this earnest money if you want to give it to somebody. You can do it electronically now. Most of the title companies will do that. I haven't done that yet. I hear it's been done. Yes. How much earnest money should be given? When I first got in the business in the late 90s, there were people putting down 10% of the purchase price, $15,000, $20,000 on a $150,000 purchase. And it's gone down since then because it's became such a hassle. So any amount that they say is fine. If they tell you $2,000 on a $150,000 purchase, tell them that's not necessary, you know, because it is at risk a little bit of staying there for a long time. So why don't we just do 500? Okay. Why might you put earnest money versus not putting it? It makes for a stronger offer if there's multiple offers. If you have it and somebody else doesn't. Everybody's offer is exactly the same, but you've got earnest money, you'd have a better offer. Okay? It talks about additional earnest money. We don't see that very often except on new construction. And you can, if you look at the builder's contracts now, if you put down earnest money, additional earnest money, it's non-refundable. It's going straight to the seller. It's going to that builder. He's going to keep it no matter what, whether you close it or not. So if you ever get somebody asking for additional earnest money, by then you'll be experienced. The only other time, I guess, where you might see it used is you're running up to a closing date and you don't think you're going to be able to do it because of the bank or the lender or something like that. then you might offer additional earnest money to keep the buyer or the seller in the contract. Don't offer a lot. They can always raise the number, you know. If you offer them 10,000, they'll take it. If you offer them 500, they might say 1,000. All right, closing. I'm gonna read this because subject to the terms of this contract, the sale will be closed, meaning the unconditional release and exchange of the deed. No more conditions, everything's been met for the purchase price, together with all the documents that are necessary. This is what the title company does. And funds required by the contract. That's a closing. And some of us have been to closings over the years where all the documents are signed by the buyer and all the documents are signed by the seller, and there's no money there. The lender hasn't delivered the money yet. You don't have a closing at that point. The only time you got a closing is when all of those have been met, and especially this one, the funds. When you get the funds, that's when you're closed. All right, then where are you gonna close? It says we're gonna close it here. The buyer gets to choose that. Now, the seller could choose to close someplace else, but most of the time they'll close wherever the buyer, wants to. So you're gonna be sitting there writing this off, and you're gonna say, where do you want to close? And guess what they're gonna say? I don't know. You can guess.
I don't know. What do you suggest?
Yeah, that's what they say. I mean, even people that are experienced, I don't know. Where do you want to close? You're not supposed to do that. If you read the MREC rules, it says, but you give them choices, you know. And here's what I tell them. I said, you know what? I've closed everywhere. And recently I closed a couple at Hogan and I've closed some at Meridian. And they both seem to do a good job. So you can pick. Which one would you pick? Hogan, Meridian, whichever one it is, and you put that in there. So you put, it's not the closing agent, it's not asking for that person, it's asking for the company. So let's say it's Hogan Land and Title. And then I like to close at Sunshine, the big building, because it looks sturdy and, you know, I feel like it's been there for 60 years. And so all I have to do is put Sunshine Street. I don't have to put the actual number address. Springfield, Missouri, and on this date. So who picks the closing date? Who picks the closing date?
I don't know.
Well, with me, I'd like to close next week. Next Friday would be good, but probably not gonna work out. I think but if you're working with a buyer, you probably should have already talked to the lender, right? You probably should. I know that sounds a little silly, but you know, if you had a consult with the buyer, you sat down, you found out what they wanted, and they told you they're gonna get their money through, what's the credit union right here? AG, credit union. And it says, great, who's your lender? And they tell you, say, could I get his contact info? And then the next thing, as soon as they get out of the car, you better be calling and saying, you know, okay, I'm showing these guys property. They say they're qualified. You got a letter maybe already. And I just want to stay in touch with you, you know. So if we do this FHA loan, what kind of time frame are we looking at? And he maybe says, it used to be 45 to 60 days. Now it's down to 30 or so. But he says, we can close it in 30 days. Well, the next question then, you know that they can close in 30 days, is you ask your buyer, when do you guys want to close? Oh, we like to close as soon as possible. I said, well, your lender thought it would be 30 days. If they're in a lease, then you've got to ask them, when does your lease end? Or we've already made arrangements around month to month. Hallelujah. You know, you can just get out. But you still, in my mind, you want to find out, is the lease first of the month to the end of the month? Is it the 15th to the 15th? Well, so you can kind of, you know, fix this date. So it's advantageous to them. So today is the 18th, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say they make their payment every month on the 23rd. I might suggest we close on the 18th of January. Reason being, now they've got 5 days that they can move out of their apartment and get all their stuff over there and clean it, and then they might get their deposit back. Probably not.
Does the seller have any say on the closing?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is a proposal.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got it.
No, you're right.
They can counter.
Okay,
Yeah, they could say, well, that won't work for us, you know, we're gonna be on a cruise the month of January, so we can't close then. And I might be saying to them, well, you know, you could sign these electronically and have the money electronically deposited, you know? Because this is a date we really need. You know, that's just a part of the negotiation. That's what agents do a lot of times that nobody ever sees, but we work it all out and we don't tell anybody, we'll close on the 23rd, that'll be fine. But you ask them, they tell you, most of them are gonna say, especially if they're excited, you know, as soon as we can get closed, we'd love to get in there, you know? Or we wanna be in by Christmas. Not happening this year. We wanna be in by the 31st of January. That's fine. You know, what's your reasoning there? You know, where our lease ends on the 31st. Okay, I mean, that's fine too. You just need to know, but you don't get to set it. If you did, all the realtors would set it for a week, 10 days, you know, because we can get the title work done in that amount of time. We just can't get all the other stuff like the loan, appraisal, the inspections, or everything else that has to be done. Love to close in 10 days. Cash deals, 10 days. Any title company just about in town, if you get rural, you might not be able to get that, but anywhere in town, you're probably gonna be able to get 10 days on any cash transaction. So if somebody wants to buy an investment house, there's one on 2101 North Weller, be a great investment. You've got a buyer, 135 cheap. Remodeled. I don't know who listed it. All right, we got that? So we end up picking the title company most of the time, but we don't pick the date we close. That's right up to the buyers. You may have to guide them and you may have to have a discussion with the title company or the lender about it. Now,
So most of the time, both parties aren't really thinking about what day of the week it is, or.
Yeah.
So sometimes that can be a sticking point later on once they realize, so, you know, just be mindful of that.
yeah, and closing at the end of the month is harder with title companies as far as picking times. And you guys all got your phones now. We used to, I've written 100 contracts to close on Sunday. Can't do that. So, you know, you look at your phone, you kind of talk them through it. It's a nice discussion because everybody's still excited. Don't know that the contract's been rejected or countered or whatever. Everybody's still excited, so you pick the date.
It's good to ask your buyer what their needs are. You know, if they have a lease, do they need some days before they need to clean and get rid of them? So it's important to ask them before you get too far into it. They can go, oh, I didn't think about that.
And it's important.
Good service to them.
It's important, especially if they're in a rental, most of them are, a lot of them. If they're selling another house, you already know that already. We'll get to that on the next page. Next, that's in possession of keys delivered to buyer at closing. Broker's not responsible for delivery of keys. You know what? If you've been in the business, anything, you've delivered keys and garage door openers and everything else. And you bought a garage door opener probably more than once because the seller didn't leave it and it's in their car in Wisconsin or somewhere. So you just, you go to Lowe's and they used to be 25. Now they're 45 or
On
something.
Amazon now.
Oh, is that how you do
I
it?
just bought one, $12.
Oh, really?
Two of them, $12.
That's pretty good.
Just had to program it and it worked.
These new locks, everybody's got them on their doors and everywhere. And the garage codes, you need to know all of that so you can reset all of that. Now, attach a rider. This is a separate document. Not an addendum or an amendment or a notice. It's a rider that you attach to contract if possession is to be transferred other than as of closing. So you've got the lease. We won't mess with that much. Possession by buyer prior to closing. That's a bad idea. Like buying a used car, you get in there and drive it down the road and you hear that noise you didn't hear before. Somebody gets into a house, there's something wrong with it. It's used. New too, for that matter. Possession by seller after closing. No, I just gave you $150,000. I want my house. I don't agree with any one of those. I do like this one, it's 2085R, which is limited purpose entry by buyer prior to closing. So the house that I wish I had up there is a remodel job by a guy that does remodels, but it's got a garage. It would be great if the buyer prior to closing could move all of their small stuff in boxes into that garage. So I ask for this all the time. I ask for limited possession all the time, especially 3-car garages. If they've got one garage, it's not space that's not being used. Because once you get all the little stuff packed up, the big stuff's not that much. And it's typically moved in one day. But we're asking somebody to move out of a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor into a 2-bedroom house, move across town, all in the same day, you know, close and move in. Sometimes that's hard. But I really like that one. And then I also like this one if it's a farm property. If you're selling a farm, then they've got stuff that they've got to move. But the farm buyer, typically, if they have any farm stuff, tractors, trailers, cows, pigs, chickens, dogs, whatever it might be. So you can ask for limited possession. And I've done that on farms. There's almost always on farms a field that's not being used that you can move animals into. And you can't move 50 head of cattle in one day. You could, but you'd have 3 trucks, 2, 3. Right. In that 37, it starts, it says that unless specified otherwise, seller warrants that the property will be vacant at the time of closing. Unless there's tenants, we're not gonna mess with that. Ordinary wear and tear accepted and free of any debris or personal property not included below. Here's what it doesn't say. Clean. It doesn't say clean in there anywhere. It says ordinary wear and tear accepted, got any repairs that were done, and free of any debris or personal property. So if you walk in there, got clothes in the closet and bags of stuff on the floor, that's personal property and debris. You call the other agent immediately while you're in the house on the walkthrough. You say, we got a problem. We're gonna take this stuff. If the seller doesn't take it, we're gonna put it in the trash or put it at the curb. What do you want to do? But if it's filthy, guess what? It's just filthy. I know you've done it. I've done it. I've mopped, swept, dusted, cleaned toilets of somebody else's house. So, I mean, we've all done it, you know, but if you're invested in your clients, if you have money, if you're not thrifty like I am, then you could hire somebody to do that. Or you could call the seller or the listing agent and say, look, this place is filthy. You know, can't you get the seller to do something about that? Every once in a while, the listing agent say, I'll get somebody over there, which would be great. But that's not the case. They don't have to because the contract just says free of any debris or personal property. Now, this is really important again on rural properties. You should write in the contract, all debris to be removed from the property. You know what I'm talking about. There's a junk car behind the barn. There's the axles. They've got a dump out there where they've been burning stuff, you know. I mean, you just want it removed. And so you do your walkthrough and you tell them, the car is still out there, so is the axle, so is the, you know, old chicken coop. We want all that gone before we move in. Okay, we good? Only took 30 minutes for that first page. 10 to go. Now, after this, it goes, no, not after yet, but it goes fast after later on. If you'll look at this list of inclusions and exclusions, it's been modified over the last couple of years. It just says that the property includes, but it's not limited to just this. All the following, if any of it's there, which are now located on the real estate, all of which seller warrants to convey to buyer free and clear at closing. Guess what else? In working condition. It doesn't say that, but it should be in working condition, right? The reason I say that is if you go to the house and the inspector ran the dishwasher and it worked, but then you go to the walkthrough and you run the dishwasher and it doesn't work, it should be working when you close. If you go there and the heat doesn't work in the winter, then you expect it to work. When these things happen, that's all on there. You call the listing agent immediately. Now, 45, if you look at that line, it's really important. You're going to call me someday and ask me the question. This contract and not a seller's disclosure statement not the MLS detail sheet or any other promotion material provides for what is included in this sale. The most common error are refrigerators. There's no refrigerator listed in this list. There is ranges and there's garbage disposals and dishwashers and things like that, but there's no refrigerator. If your clients want the refrigerator, I don't care if it's in every picture in the MLS and it's on their marketing brochure and they say, French door refrigerator, original cost $4,000. If you don't write it on line 50, you're not getting the refrigerator. And when you write that refrigerator in there, you should say stainless steel refrigerator in the kitchen. Because if you just put refrigerator, at my house, you're getting the beer refrigerator in the garage. You're not gonna get the stainless steel, you know? I'm gonna give you the cheap one because all you asked for was a refrigerator, right? Would I do that? No. But I mean, I could legally, there couldn't be any question about it. The other thing, we had one a couple years ago, and I'll make it short. But this girl calls me, an agent goes, hey, we've got a problem. I said, what's your problem? Not me, but with another agent. So what's going on? She goes, we just walked into the kitchen and the island's gone, and so is the hanging rack that was above it, you know, big metal rack where you put all the pots on. I said, dang. I said, did you write the island in the contract? And she said, no, why would I have to? It's portable. It was a portable island. So, you know, I mean, I warn you about this, you'll probably forget. You need to do the bump test on islands.
Oh, okay.
And you need to look and see if there's
I just
electric.
always thought they were attached.
If there's electric, well, this was a probably
Yeah.
400 pounds. It had a granite top on it and everything, but it was portable. And so the guy took it with him and there's nothing they could do about it. I said, you can call and ask, but they don't have to bring it back. She said, what about the pot rack? I said, they've got to replace that because it was attached. So they could either pay you, look it up online, see how much it costs, double that and tell them that's what you need, or tell them to bring the pot rack back. And so they agreed to that. But the island, it's like you walk into the living room and there's a end table at the end of the couch. Same thing. I mean, just like the island. So you have to be careful on those things. My suggestion is this. If your client says they want something, you write it on line 50. I don't care if it's included in the contract, but they promise, if they've signed in blood that they're going to give it to you, you put it in the contract or it doesn't exist. Storage buildings, walk out in the backyard and there's a storage building out there. If it's not on a permanent foundation, it better be on line 50 because they can haul that baby right out of there. We call them children's play sets. Your kids are so excited. Woo! You get there today, you know, walk through and it's gone. If you didn't write it in there, it doesn't exist. All right, everybody good on that? So if you want something, write it in there. You want the gnomes in the front yard? Identify them. And then if you're working on an FHA, you might add the last thing you add to whatever. Let's say you got a list of items in there. TV in every room of the house to remain with the property, along with stainless steel refrigerator in the kitchen, and the washer and dryer currently in the laundry room at no value is the last thing you need to add. So you might want to write that down because lenders, you know, they'll loan on a dishwasher, but they won't loan on a refrigerator, which doesn't make any sense, right? If you put refrigerator in there, they want you to take it out unless you put at no value. Everything else probably should be at no value also. Then, if you go down to 53, you look, excluded. These are things that you're not going to get. They're not owned by the seller. Propane tanks, we get more problems with propane tanks because about 70% are not owned, they're leased. And so, because they're leased, then you have to buy the propane from the company that you lease it from. Now, the seller, if it's owned, you should probably still ask for the propane tank, even if it's owned. Because recently they've been taking them away. Now, I don't agree with that because it provides fuel for the furnace or whatever it is, but I've seen it done. And I don't know how an attorney would argue it. So if you have any questions, if you know it's owned by the seller, you might include the propane tank too. But if the propane tank's not owned by the seller, then it can be excluded. This also goes for storage buildings. You know, you've seen them in the backyards of houses that you wouldn't want in your house. Seller removes storage building. Swing sets, you're selling it to an elderly couple who doesn't have any grandkids, or if they do, they don't want them at their house. You know, you can exclude this swing set to be moved prior to closing. Okay? So, all right, we're all in agreement now. If you're newer agents, are you with me back there? If we want it, we include it. If we don't want it, we exclude it. All right? Same thing. What's going to get you into trouble?
You don't include it.
Right. Propane tanks. Always be worried about propane tanks. I don't care if they say they own it or not. If we had more time and we don't, I would tell you the story about where we got sued. We, the company, but the agent got sued. And they, of course, they throw me in there every time because I'm the broker, but over a propane tank. Okay, paragraph 5, this house or contract is contingent upon the seller closing is not contingent upon a sale or closing of any other existing property. So if they're coming out of a rental, you're good. Or maybe their house is already under contract because they've got a house. That would be this one. This contract is contingent upon the selling and closing of existing property of buyer. Okay, and then you would choose one of these, contingency for sale or contingency for closing. If it's under contract, it's a contingency for closing. If it's not under contract, it may not even be listed. Maybe you're going to list it. It'd be contingency for sale. And you're going to run into this where people say, man, I'm just scared to death, that, I want to really buy this house, but, I'm afraid mine won't sell. Well, it's not going to sell if it's not listed. It's got about a 5% chance, 3 to 5. So if you want to protect your seller, he's afraid that he won't be able to find a house, you can put in there contingent upon the seller finding a house to purchase and going under contract within 7 days of accepted contract. I know that's getting confusing. I'm not trying to confuse you. I'm really not. Point is this. If they have a house to sell, it's either under contract or not. If it's not, then you use the rider contingency for sale. If it's under contract, you use a contingency for closing. What you should probably do is put that, if that house is under contract, let's say you're the listing agent, and it closes January 31st, then that's the date that you want to close the one they're purchasing. They're going to bring this money to close this one. That's how it is most of the time. Now, there are some people who've got lots of money or they've got lines of credit and they'll say, it's not contingent upon the sale. Okay? Those are good ones. You like that a lot. Appraisal contingency. Really the key thing here is you're going to get an appraisal. If you're getting a loan, doesn't matter. You don't want to put 25 days in here. If we said we're going to close on the 31st of January, that'd actually be 51 days, I think. No, that's not right. 43 days. I'm putting 43 days right there. Line 69 or 70. I'm going to put the same amount of time in the contract because the appraisal doesn't come in until the last week of the contract most of the times. And if it comes in too low, you want to be able to negotiate for your buyers using the appraisal notice on 71. And you just send it over and say, hey, we got the appraisal back. We wrote the contract for 154, it appraised for 148. And you tell the seller, we want you to reduce the price to 148. And you can negotiate. So if you get an appraisal that's under your contract price, here's what can happen. The seller can reduce. The buyer can come up and say, look, I'll just buy it. I don't care. You can negotiate. Or you can terminate the contract without penalty. But not unless you're within this time frame. That's why you put the 43 days in this case. We're saying we're writing the contract today and we're going to the 31st. 31 and 12, basically. All right? That easy enough? You're gonna run into appraisal issues sometime in your career. Don't worry about it. There's not much you can do about it. The appraisers won't change much. So it's good for your buyer if it comes in lower. But a lot of times, and we had this happen quite a bit last few years, where it might come in under 40,000. And the seller would say, I'm not changing the price, and the buyer would have to come up with the additional money because the lender is only going to say, I'm only going to loan them to here. And so you got to bring the rest of the cash. But you know, the market was so stupid and crazy that we didn't have any problems with that. All right, at 79, it says not contingent on financing under the financing contingency part. There are people who, you know, it doesn't matter. Like if I'm going to buy a house or remodel, I've got a line of credit, you know, just write a check for it. So I could still finance a portion of it if I wanted to. Maybe I've got enough money to buy it, but I say, okay, I want to leave that option open. So I just want to use, it's $100,000 remodel house. I'm going to use 50,000 cash. I'm going to borrow the other 50,000 so I can use my other 50,000 to do the remodel. Or there's some people just have a lot of damn money and they can buy it. And it's not contingent on financing. And they tell you that up front. And they say, you know, here's a letter from my lender or my investor, and you know, I can cover pretty much what I'm talking about. That's good. If you say it's not contingent upon financing, don't be surprised if this seller comes back to you or the listing agent says, can we have some proof of funds, which is fine. 82, non-conventional loan. This is any government loan, any FHA, VA, USDA, MHDC. I'm missing some letters somewhere, but if it's government, the government's attached to it in any way or guarantees it any way, you have to use the government loan rider. That's MSC 2011R. You're probably not going to do seller financing, and you're probably not going to do loan assumption. I thought that would be really a big deal after the low rates, but it turns out it's not easy. You know, it doesn't work. I thought it would be easy. I thought you just say, okay, I'll assume your loan and go forward. It doesn't work that way. All right, so any government loan, check the box. If you don't attach MSC 2011R, you don't have a valid contract. All right, on conventional, you check the box here. A conventional loan is probably anything 95% or less. So if they're putting down 5% money to be conventional. They have some FHA conventionals too, which I don't understand that. But if they say it's a conventional loan, if the lender says that, it's a specific type of loan, there's costs associated with it. The key on this, though, is a loan contingency deadline on line 88. What number do you think should go in there? You guys aren't paying attention. Oh, you are. I'm just kidding. You know, I used to teach English. Did you know that?
I did not know.
10 years. Yeah. And I used to teach Beowulf and things, just some really good stuff. But my English class, when I first started teaching for my student teaching, was after lunch in the Boot Hill of Missouri.
Well, that's the worst time.
In September. I mean, you know, everybody comes back from lunch, humidity's 95%. You know, sometimes I feel like that's how it is when I teach contract. Same thing. It's okay. Look, if you put 43 in that day and one under the appraisal, you probably ought to put 43 here, because the lender, and anybody with experience will know, the lender is not going to call you like 15 days into the contract and say, hey, we got a problem. He's going to call you the last week and go, we got a problem. You know, your buyer just bought a truck. Or we just discovered, we ran his credit again and we found a medical payment that hadn't been made, or whatever it might be, and so we're not gonna be able to do this loan. If you don't do that, down here on line 10 something, I can't see it right there, 106, if you don't meet the loan contingency deadline, or you don't terminate the contract because you can't get the loan, he's still obligated, which means he could be in default. And that's FHA, VA, that's USDA, doesn't matter. Now, good luck suing any of these people, because they don't have any money in the first place. But at the same time, that's what the contract says, because it adds value to the contract. But to protect your buyer, you want the full term of the contract. Now, you're gonna get pushback from some sellers, which is fine, but you really don't wanna push that thing more than 7 days. So you might do 36, and then you stay on the lender every day. Is there a problem? Is there a problem? Is there a problem? Because if you don't send over the notice, which says, look, we can't buy the house, the lender, here's a lender denial letter, within that timeline, they're still obligated to purchase. You're not gonna get paid, because the only way the seller's gonna get it is to sue the buyer, because he doesn't have the money, he can't get the loan. It doesn't matter if it's a $50,000 house, $100,000 house, $150,000 house, $200,000 house. All right? Okay, you're good on that, right? See, you're really good. 97 through 100, you should complete what you know. And typically, again, if you've been talking to the lender, how much they're gonna borrow? FHA, 96.5. VA, they could borrow as much as 100%. They don't have to, but they could. USDA, 100%. Okay? You probably don't know what that is, like if they're borrowing 87%, and then fill in the numbers, trying to figure that on 150, what's 87% of 150,000? You don't know, so don't do that. I mean, you can do it on your phone.
So
The point is,
Just to be clear, if it's a government loan, you're not filling out those sections, right? Because it's only for conventional.
no, you fill it out on everybody. You should. MREC says every blank should be filled.
Right.
Now, I don't fill out the dollars because it's easier to go 96.5, or what are you borrowing? 80%. Okay, I put down 80%. Interest rate not to exceed is a key one here, because if your client's a first-time home buyer, their debt to income is probably not really wide. So you've got to keep an eye on that. So the interest rate right now is what? 6.25, let's say. Okay. You call the lender, you talk to the lender and say, look, where can't they buy? What would the interest rate have to be for them not to be able to buy for what they're qualified for? And they'll tell you, well, if it went to 6.5, they can't buy. So that's what you should put in that blank. It can't exceed 6.5. This is a protection for your buyer, right? Amortization term is going to be 30 years. Rate type is going to be fixed. We're not going to see many adjustable loans. If you do, they'll tell you up front. The lender will say, this is an adjustable rate or whatever it might be. Other terms could be anything. It could be, you put in there, there's no loan, NA, seller is paying cash. And we've already seen this, if buyer doesn't attach MSC 2021R. And that's the government loan rider deal, right? The buyer's inability to obtain a loan due to the failure of the sale and or closing of another property, buyers will not constitute grounds to exercise this financing contingency. In other words, if you check a box saying I'm attaching this, it has to be attached. On title and survey, we're going to send the contract. Typically, it's the listing agent, but I don't trust him. So I always send the contract to wherever I'm closing. So if it's Hogan Land and Title, I'll send the contract. All I need is a contract and any riders or amendments to the contract. I need that. I don't need everything. It might be a good idea to send in the MLS detail, because sometimes there's things in the MLS detail that need to be put into the title. And we've seen that a couple of times. But you want to get it to them immediately. You can hand deliver it, you can email it or whatever, but you want to get it in the hands of the right person. And there are different people that who do these closings. So if you're going to Hogan Land and Title, you might for the very first time walk in there. Say, hey, Just wrote this contract. We're closing January 31st. Want to introduce myself. Who will be the closer assigned to this? And then you can get all their contact information. You can put it into your system, and then you can stay in contact with them. We're gonna choose, if it's me, on 112, we're gonna say that 10 days is plenty of time. Now, if you're getting a survey, it might not be. If you're in Polk County, it might not be. Webster County might not be. But in Greene County, Christian County, you're probably gonna get your title work back within 10 days. They should send it to you. Email a copy to you. For whatever reason, they don't email a copy to the buyer. You should immediately push forward and send it to the buyer, and push forward and send it to the other agent. As soon as you get it. Now, I know you've never seen any title work, right? Have you? At some point, you want to look at title work. You want to read through it. It should be just who's selling the property, how much you're paying off if they are, and then who they're deeding it to. It should be your buyers. But then there's a section called B, and those are the exceptions to the title. And there could be a problem there. Now, good title companies will tell you immediately, hey, we got a problem. There's an easement right through the center of the house, or there's a federal tax lien on the property, or there's a state tax lien on the property, or the seller owes back child support. It could be a little bit of anything, but they will tell you, most of them, that we need to get this taken care of before we can close. Most of the time, they can take care of it. And most of the time, once the seller knows about it, and then they know about the federal tax lien, but once they know about it, they'll take care of it. But it's got to be taken care of before closing, okay? We're going to choose, most of the time, number 3 of those 4 choices. The seller is going to provide a title commitment to the buyer, and it's at seller's cost, and the title company is going to issue an owner's policy at buyer's cost, because that's fair. I shouldn't have to pay your buyer's title insurance for the next 20 years that they own the property. They should pay that. So that's typically is 3 is what we choose. And I'll let you read the rest of them so we don't slow down. But that's the fairest transaction with the title company. The costs are typically right now around $200 for the seller, but the buyers could be thousands, right? Yeah, the buyer's policy could be thousands. We don't want the seller to pay for that because he's already paid for title insurance to cover him up to the day he closes. Now it's the buyer paying for their own buyer's policy at their cost. And it's typically built into the loan, but okay. Who's going to issue this title commitment and the owner's policy? The same title company you wrote on page 1. And then it says buyer has 10 days, if none stated, to review the title commitment. If there's not a problem, 10 days is plenty. They get it. It's 4 or 5 pages typically. They can read through it. Here's the deal. We're not attorneys, so you've got to depend on the title company to alert you to any issues. We had one just recently that cost our agent some money where they closed, she got the title commitment, went to closing, they closed, but it's supposed to close on 2 lots. It was advertised in the MLS as 2 lots side by side. They only closed 1 lot because that's what the title company had. It said this address, and it said that's lot 32. Well, lot 31 was advertised in the MLS as included in the sale. Nobody paid any attention. The listing agent didn't pay any attention. The buyer's agent didn't pay any attention. The buyers don't know crap. I'm just telling you. Sorry about that. They don't know. And so they're depending on you or the title company to protect them. Well, then the seller starts getting tax bills on this lot. And she doesn't think she owns it anymore. And so she gets in contact with her agents who just hang up on her. Think she's crazy. So then she calls the buyers then call our agent. Anyhow, we say, well, this is easy. You sold it already. You agreed to sell it. Just signed a quick claim deed, and we're done. Title company called her too. No, I wasn't paid for that lot. Then we get into a mess. Then you get an attorney involved. It takes 1 year, and now the buyers have their lot And the lady finally decided we were right and she should have signed the title release. But it costs the attorney $6,000, you know? Attorneys always win. So read the title commitment. If you think you're selling lot 31 and 32, it should say that in black block letters. Not to scare you anything. All right, so you get it, you review it, there's a problem, you give notice to the seller. You just tell the seller, look, here's the problem. You got a federal tax lien that needs to be taken care of. And it can be, you can put in there that it has to be corrected prior to closing or whatever number of days you want. So, and if they agree to it in writing, because you're gonna send it over in a notice form and they're gonna have to sign it, you're good. You just gotta make sure it's done. Title company won't close unless it's taken care of. We sold a house one time in Emerald Park for $350,000 and had a $365,000 federal tax lien against it. My wife was still working with me. She went to the IRS, which was right behind her office over on Battlefield there. And she sat down with them, got it reduced to 50%. I know, that was pretty good. Seller should have been happy because we represented the buyer. Obviously, you always wanted to close. Okay, all the rest of this has to do with there's an issue on the title works. We go to the next page, stop the page, and the seller should correct it. If the seller says they're not going to correct it, you can terminate the contract without penalty. Now, if your buyer wants a survey, and I've been in it long enough that we used to get a survey on every house we sold. And then somewhere in there, about 1996 or 7 or 8, somewhere in there, they quit saying, we don't need it anymore because we've already done this deal 2 or 3 times. I guarantee you go downtown in Springfield, half those houses, if you surveyed them, the lot lines are bad. You know, fences are in the wrong places or whatever, but it's okay. Most of the time though, you're buying in a subdivision, let's say it's Emerald Park. The house has been there now. When I was first got it, they were fairly new. They're probably 20 years old, 25 years old now. They may have already turned over a couple of times, not contingent upon a survey. Now, who will determine whether you have to have a survey or not? The lender, a lot of times, just say, we need a survey. Okay, if it is contingent upon a survey, we've got a brand new survey writer that you can use. If you're getting a survey, you need a 45-day close, minimum. If your buyer is getting a survey, I would always ask the seller to pay for it. And if the seller doesn't agree and says, no, I want the buyer to pay for it, then I would go back with a counter and say, how about we split it? Back to the title part of this. If I get a survey and it turns up things that have to be objected to, there's a sinkhole, there's an easement, there's something catastrophic on the property. And I ask the seller to fix it after I've paid for the survey and they say no, I terminate the contract. The seller is now responsible for paying for the survey. Now, you've got to collect it from them, so good luck with that, but it's in the contract in writing, so you can point it out to them and have an attorney, send them the letter.
What examples have you seen in your work experience on
Survey?
the survey coming from the lender? So like what,
Well, the lender
does
says
that
no.
come from the appraisal, or does that just come from them saying
The lender says, our underwriter says we have to have a survey.
the underwriter, okay?
From now on, every lot we sell, every house we sell. I mean, they could do that, and if they did, it'd just become a part of the transaction. Again, like I said, in the 90s, up to the 90s, you got a survey on everything. Every time there was a house, you'd see red flags out in the front yard, every time, no matter where it was. And then they went away from it, I think, again, because they thought they had enough data. But, a lot of people depend on the CRS. They look at the CRS and go, oh, there's the lot lines. Hell, they're not right. That's a LiDAR picture from 5 miles up, they're not accurate. I've had more agents come to me and go, look, that building's over there, over the lot line. You don't know that unless you get a survey. All right, on D, this is something that was added this year. It says limitation of title objection rights only applies if the following box is checked. All recorded subdivision indentures, covenants, declarations, and restrictions shall be permitted exceptions and buyer waives its right to object to any of these items as part of the title review period above. I think you should check that if your client, unless your client says, nah, I really want to review all of this. Okay. And then it becomes a contingency. So this is, even though, and I had this question in the sales meeting, it's not really about title. It just says all of these things that you're looking at, your buyer wants to look at, the restrictions and covenants or whatever it might be, are included in the title period. If they don't do it in that period, then they go away. Or I'm waiving that right. Most of my clients would say, well, let's just, I'll get the CC&Rs, I'll give them to you, you read them. We won't write the contract until you get them done. Good? Okay. I know you're not getting all of this. Again, most of you went to Sunday school when you were a kid, right? If you didn't go to the Catholic church, they really don't have Sunday school. But if you went to a Baptist church like I did, we had Sunday school. We had to memorize Bible verses. This is how you should treat this. You're not going to know the whole damn verse, right? But you're going to know generally what it says. The 10 Commandments, I bet you couldn't quote them exactly. He probably could. But most of you couldn't. But I bet you could get 9 out of the 10 pretty close to right and kind of generally say what they're all about. That's what you have to do with the contract. So when you get to the title work, you don't understand the title much better than they do, but you do know that the title company is going to do a search and they're looking, really what they're trying to do is make sure that this has title, marketable title that can be transferred. If there's any problems, they're going to tell you, hopefully, and then you're going to explain that to your client. They're going to say, we're going to ask the seller to fix this. We're going to put it in writing. That's the whole page and a half of title stuff they just said. That's what you've got to do. You don't have to do anything special. All right, on inspections. I want you to see this because everybody misses this. The property is being sold in its present condition with no warranties expressed or implied except which may be given to the buyer in writing. What does that mean? All properties are being sold as is. That's what it says right there. Now, you don't put that in the listing, but basically what you see is what you're going to get unless you do inspections. Conditions of the property are disclosed or clearly visible should be considered by the buyer in setting the purchase price or by making correction of such conditions by seller requirement of this contract. In other words, you walk into a house, walk up to a house to show it, your client loves the house, this is the neighborhood they want to live in. The glass is broken, the door. Okay? You write it in the offer. Seller to repair the glass. You walk into the house, there's water coming out of the ceiling. Your buyer says, I don't care, I still want to buy. All right. Seller to repair or replace the roof prior to closing and repair the ceiling. You write it into the contract because these are things that material facts, right? This is one of your jobs, one of your only jobs as an agent. These are material issues. You walk into that bedroom I was talking about earlier where the kids got their black walls and black ceiling, and your client goes, well, it is paint. You think they'd paint it? We can ask, right? And it's not a competitive market right now. This is a balanced market pretty much. Maybe it's a little even better for the buyers right now. I'd write it in the contract. You walk into the basement, the carpet's just nasty. The kids have been down there drinking energy drinks and doing all that nonsense. I wish that carpet was better shape, I mean, to write it in there, I'll write it in there. And you could ask for too much. We know that too. But at the same time, one of the things I found out is in the old market a year and a half ago, you couldn't ask for anything. You couldn't even get discounts on prices. Now you can ask for stuff again. And what can they say? There's only 2 choices, right? What are they?
Yes or no?
Yes or no? So write it in there. All right. If you want to buy it as is, there's a writer for that. Okay? There's a writer for that. Let's make sure you check the right boxes. Now, what you see the next thing on here. Buyer may inspect the property or have it inspected by a qualified inspector on buyer's behalf. What does that mean? Who can inspect the property? I should have made all you guys sit on the front row. Who can inspect the property? Simple question, out there, if you're watching. Inspector. You can get a specialist, but you don't have to, do you? Who can inspect it? The buyer can inspect it. Believe that? And some of them will do that. You wait and see. Somebody's gonna tell you, I didn't do my own inspection. Fine. But if you do an inspection and then you want to prepare an inspection notice, you've got to have documentation to provide to the seller, whatever it might be. You could write it on a piece of newspaper. It doesn't matter, but you've got to have it. But the buyer can inspect, and it goes on to say that the buyer can also appraise. Lender's not going to accept it, so they don't do that, but you will see buyers inspect. Typically, it used to say that they had to have a specialist, business professional inspect the property, qualified
Yeah.
business professional, qualified professional inspect the property. They took that out. I don't know why. All right, it goes on to say, if you have somebody inspect the property and you break something, you gotta fix it. We know that. Property data period, this is what's called the buyer's remorse paragraph. If you put 5 days in there, it means that anytime during the 5 days, your buyer could just call you and say, you know what? I've been thinking about it and I've looked at some of the stuff about the property and I'm done. I want out. That's it. So when somebody makes an offer to me that's got 5 days in there, I counter and say, no, 0. You've had time to look at it. You've reviewed the subdivision restrictions. You should have already linked. If you're worried about sex offenders, convicted criminals and all that, you should look that up yourself because I can't do it. You're not supposed to as an agent. So I'm gonna counter back 0, even if I like the price of this deal. Or I might put 1 in there, but I'm not putting 5 because here's what happens, especially in a market like this. If there's 50 houses or 30 houses a day coming on the market, they might find their new house, another house they like better. Or it gives their mother-in-law time to come over and say, I cannot believe you're buying this house. And the son goes, you don't think we should buy it? And mom goes, no. And they go, okay, we're out of it. All it takes is an email. You don't even have to have a mutual release. It's just done. So you don't like that one. As a buyer's agent, if you're protecting your buyers, you like it better than I do. But most agents aren't going to like it very much.
Jim, I know one of the key things that I try to have conversations with, just in there list presence of sex offenders.
Oh yeah, sex offenders, that's a totally different deal.
If your buyers, you have that conversation, if those things are gonna be issues to them, find out that those before making the offer, look at those things prior to. I mean, that information is readily available these days, and all those things that they might find important.
Well, when I was
They don't
working
wanna
all the
find that out.
time, one of the things I did was I gave a contract to my clients when we first started looking at houses. And they would ask me questions as we were showing houses about the contract. And these are things that came up. But legally, the law would tell you that you can't tell them a sex offender's living next door to this house. Legally. Morally, I don't care. Find me, take my license. If they've got small children or children at all, or even if they don't like it, I'm gonna tell them, last night on KY3, this guy was shown right here. Or if I just know, you can go to Greene County or the Missouri State Highway Patrol or the city website, typically all has anybody that's registered. But yeah, I agree with that.
If you put 0 to get the offer accepted, and then they find out later, and that's important to them, that there is, with whatever they feel comfortable with, someone living close by. Contractually, they can't get out of the contract for that purpose.
Yeah, you got some other
They'd have to
reasons.
find another way to get out of it, so.
If that's important though, I mean, hopefully. Well, I shouldn't say that, but most mamas I know have already done their research on these kind of things. But I sold a church one time down on Grand Street And the people that were buying the church said, you know, what's the criminal activity like? And I thought, oh, boy. I mean, it's way west on Grand before you get to, the bypass.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
And I said, I can't really help you with that. I said, I'm legally, I can't do that. I said, but here's where you go. So I gave him the address. So I went back and checked and I'm like, dang, that area is pretty nice. I mean, and then you got on the other side of Kansas Expressway and it lit up like a Christmas tree. I mean, there was, you know, assaults and drugs and all. But I would have thought on the other side, between Kansas Expressway and the West Bypass, it would have just been full of criminal activity. No, it was really good. Really shocked. They bought it. I was good with it. But I mean, I wanted to make sure myself that I wasn't selling them something, you know, that they felt bad about. But I mean, they told me the same thing. They said, I couldn't believe it. Like,
So I got a question. So I was a Springfield officer for 25 years,
Uh-huh.
so I know all the areas in Springfield, obviously. So if somebody's looking in that area and they ask me because they know my past profession, I cannot say anything.
I just say, you know, you need to go to the Greene County Sheriff's Department. They've got a
Okay.
website that shows you all the activity. But I would also caution them, because you know this as a police officer or ex-police officer, you need to make the map larger, because when it's squeezed down like this, it looks like a Christmas tree. I mean, it looks like there's one on every single corner. So you've got to, you know, you need to kind of drill down so that you've got it wide enough, because it will. And the thing is, I don't know what time frame it is. I don't know if it goes back a year or 2 years or something like that, you know, but if it goes back 10, I mean, there could be a lot.
What happens if you experience it? No, there hasn't been calls, but then as soon as they buy it, it changes.
Yeah,
They're gonna
that's
think
true.
either you lied to them
That's true.
or that you were incompetent and you don't want either of
That's
those.
right,
two.
too. I never thought of that. You need probably let them do the research. I do the research too, as soon as they ask, obviously. But I'm not gonna let that sway the decision. Now, as far as a sex offender goes, look. I don't care who I'm dealing with. If I know there's a sex offender there in the area, I've become aware of it through something else, I'm telling them, you know. Oh, it's a great house, but you know, that guy across the street. And there are different levels of sex offenders. That's the other problem is, I grew up in the Boot Hill. And it's just exactly like what you think country was. I mean, when I was 18, I was dating 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds, and I mean, that's not legal. I mean, you know, if I'd have been caught with my shoes off, that was the old thing, you know, keep your shoes on. Not a kid though. All right, inspection reports. So the buyer, it says, may, at buyer's option expense, obtain written inspection reports. We already know that the buyer can do it themselves. But look, he can do an inspection on anything. It doesn't matter what it is. Foundations, drainage, irrigation, insects, radon, red dye. I don't know. You can do an inspection on it. You can't prevent that. I had one doing an inspection looking for evil spirits in a house in downtown Springfield one time. I wish we had more time. For your buyer, what you're going to do on the next paragraph D on the inspection notice, you're going to put in there 15 on line 185. Never put less than 15. Unless the contract's closing in 16 days. I mean, you're gonna need 15 days. And part of it is, as a new agent, sometimes you don't, like if those guys call their inspection, the inspection company they use, they go the next day, probably. But if you're new, you're not gonna get priority. You may be 5 days into it before they'll do the inspection. It may be 3 days before you get it back. Now you're 8 days into the contract. You don't want it at 10 days. You want it minimum 15. And then remember this, if you're getting towards the end of your inspection period, 15 days, and you've got a counter in your head, you've written it on the wall if you're smart, you ask for 5 more days in writing, either by text or email, and say, I need 5 more days for the inspection. It says specialist. Don't listen to that. You can get 5 more days. So you can get them 20 days without any problem. Okay? So, this whole thing. We represent our clients, they say, you know, we tell them they need to get an inspection. You really want them to get an inspection. They're gonna ask you who, you've got a list of inspectors, but it's not a complete list. So if you know of somebody that's a good inspection company, tell Nicole and we'll get it added on there. The inspector goes out, does the inspection, it'll come back as 40 to 70 pages. It looks like the house has fallen down. You gotta warn your clients beforehand. Just remember this, you know, this is a CYA job for the inspector. He's gotta cover everything. So he's gonna write everything in there. We're looking for material issues that could cause this sale not to close. Okay? We're not looking for caulk around the bathtub unless the floor is rotten. If there's a light bulb out, there's a light bulb out. Now, if the wires are hanging out of the wall, that's a material issue. So don't freak out when you see this report. The inspector then is gonna send them a copy of the report. He should copy you also. As soon as you get it, here's what I suggest. You push forward because it's gonna be an electronic version and send it to the listing agent. And a lot of people don't agree with that, but I want them to see what I'm looking at. So that when I do meet with my client after they've reviewed it and I've reviewed it, and we sit down, we create what's called an inspection notice. And we say, look, here's the issues, the items we want fixed. Seller to repair or replace. Seller to have qualified contractor. You don't have to have a specialist to put a switch on the wall or, you know, fix a toilet flap that's not flapping or whatever. Qualified contractors, qualified contractor. If the inspector says there's a roof issue, whatever it might be, you immediately call a roofer and get the roofer up there because it's the buyer's responsibility to do the inspection. And let the roofer say what needs to be done. Maybe the roofer goes, it's fine, it's got some granular loss. We have granular loss on roofs the day they are installed. So that's not an issue. It's typically they will give you something like we got 10 to 15 years left, or we got 5 years left or whatever. That's plenty. 5 usually means 10, 10 means 20. But you want to get somebody out there immediately if you need a specialist, but you still got to do it within that time frame. And then you sit down with your buyer, you write up the notice and you send it to the listing agent to provide it to the seller. Now, the seller then has 10 days to figure out if they're going to do everything on the list. Hopefully you've asked for reasonable things. The seller wants to sell, the buyer wants to buy, seller goes, sure, I'll fix it all and signs it. They could counter, and you could counter back and forth. You can only counter back and forth within that 10-day period. At the end of 10 days, if your buyer has sent an inspection notice to the seller and the seller hasn't agreed to it, the contract's terminated. It's over. It's done. And that's a protection for your buyer is what it is. Obviously, you don't want that. Your buyer probably doesn't want it. But if the seller will not agree to whatever notice items you've noticed, and again, you counter back and forth, but at the end of the 10th day at midnight, if you don't have 2 signatures on that final notice, it terminates. But, and I don't know why this is stuck here, but if an inspection notice is timely given on 193, it shall state if the buyer is satisfied with all inspections, never gonna happen. There are unacceptable conditions to be satisfied, or 197, what does that say? Buyer elects to terminate the contract. We don't want that, right? Buyer wants to buy, seller wants to sell. So you have your buyer check 199. Now your buyer may tell you, and we had a buyer recently that just adamantly refused to check that. He said, I did that, you know, in a contract a while back. I had to fight them for 6 months to get my earnest. I'm not doing that. You know what? If they tell you absolutely, they don't want to check that, they want the right to terminate after the inspection, you let them have that right. Now you represent the buyer. My deal is what I tell my buyers most of the time is, look, you want to buy a house, correct? Seller wants to sell a house. Let's give them an opportunity to fix everything if we find something wrong. I mean, we've been through the house. You love it enough to write an offer. Unless it's something catastrophic, you know, why would you terminate? Well, you know, I'd terminate if it had mold and crawl space. Okay, we better not check that box because every house in Southwest Missouri has mold or fungus, they call it now, in the crawl space. I like my buyers to check that, but you're gonna run into buyers who say, no, I wanna do the inspection and have the right to terminate the contract. That's fine. All right, we already talked about the 10 days, you understand that? If you're representing the seller, you get the inspection notice, the clock starts. The clock is 24-hour increments. So if we make an offer today that gets accepted, day one is the 19th, not the 18th. And then you count from there. Got it? Same thing on the notice, anything we write, it's all 24-hour increments. So it starts the next day, basically. All right, now we can race through the contract. You ready? We don't have government inspections on 216F. Yay, not yet. It's typically a moneymaker for most governments. They say it's to protect the community and the public and blah, blah, blah. It's not, it's about money. We don't have them, thank God. If you're in St. Louis, you might have 4 more inspections other than the inspector. G, on 230, home warranty. Most of the time, you're not gonna have a home warranty. Buyer acknowledges seller is not providing one. 2 says the seller agrees to pay. This is where you're asking for the home warranty from the seller. They're about 600 now, aren't they? Are you still doing HSA or are you guys doing a CHASA?
We don't do many of them.
You don't. You guys used to put them on every single house.
Yeah,
Now that Rick's gone.
we don't have a local rep for
Yeah, I know.
HSA anymore.
HSA.
And they're just not as user-friendly as they used to be.
Yeah.
So.
They used to, the Gardner team he was on, they had a home warranty on everything. And HSA loved them and provided a lot of benefits for them, which was good. I mean, that's what you should do. And I liked HSA and I tried to put them on mine. That guy is gone, or that person that we did it with. Now we've got HSA and a CHOSA. But the warranties have gone up quite a bit. They're like $600. Now, is there any reason you couldn't ask the seller to put a home warranty on there? Nah, because what could they say? Yes or no? In a competitive market, maybe not. But in this market, maybe you ask for it.
I remember in the one previous class, you said that you normally put them on yours. Is that what you're saying? Like you normally put the HSA on yours?
I normally ask for it if I'm representing the
Normally
buyer.
ask for it. And then, can you explain it to me? So like, does that cover a certain amount of years or is that just for
1
the
year.
first year? So it's whatever, $600 and it's
For closing, and
it's
it
for
covers
1 year.
primarily the major appliances. So the furnace, air conditioner, water heater, dishwasher, garbage disposal. They say they cover plumbing leaks and they say they cover the roof and they say, but I've never seen a lot of coverage in that area. That's more your home insurance. But, to
1 year.
have a contractor install a water heater now is $1,000, isn't it? Shouldn't be, but it is, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Well, no, I mean, my contractor can do it a lot cheaper, but everybody I've seen, if you call Ozark Plumbing, it's probably $1,500. And they'll pull a permit, which, I'm never gonna pull a permit for a water heater. But point is that,
It's worth having the conversations, which
yeah, you could ask for it. And then guess what? The nice thing about home warranties, since you've been here before, you've heard this. They got a problem, now they call the home warranty company. They don't call you first. If they don't have a home warranty, they call you and say, hey, my air conditioner's out. Like, what? I mean, it's your house. It's what you should say, that's home ownership. This isn't a rental anymore. But if they've got a warranty program, they call them. They still have to pay a service call. But they call in, I think the CHOSA, you can call anybody you want to out there. And they'll pay X. And then 3 on 236, seller has a home warranty plan. That's why I was pointing out the former Gardner team, man, they had a home warranty on everything. Because it was really advantageous and the home warranty rep was really good and he worked to make sure that the buyers got covered really good, We don't have that anymore. All right, here's paragraph 8. I already told you this, so we don't have to go through it. You get earnest money, guess what? It's gonna stay in there until you get a mutual release, or it's gonna go to the state. Paragraph 9, we have tornadoes in this area. We actually sit on a fault, or we're pretty close to one. The New Madrid Fault actually reaches pretty far over here. We also have fires. And any of those things could cause a total loss or a partial loss on a property that's under contract. If you have that, the buyer can actually take the insurance proceeds and get the property. Now, if they're getting a loan, lender's probably not gonna lend, so that's out, but maybe not. Maybe you're paying cash or whatever. You could get the insurance proceeds for it. It might work out, it might not. It could just be partially damaged. We had a tornado a few years ago at Evan DeShong's house, but before that, we had one in Battlefield that damaged a lot of properties, destroyed some, and we had properties under contract. Some of our clients said, nope, I'll let them fix it back because this is where I want to live. And some of them said, I want out, which you can't. You can terminate the contract. You can do it either way. On closing costs, this is a real challenge for new agents because they've just gone through real estate school where they made you do all this calculation and all this left and right and figuring loan and interest rates and association dues. Not your job. Don't ever do it again. You turn in the contract, the title company may call you and say, hey, who's the head of the homeowners association so we can see if the dues are paid. You research that, give it to them, they check it, they do all the prorations, you don't do anything. You kind of look at it when you get the closing statement. Other than that, that's it. Okay? Here is the person that determines all these closing costs. Look online, go to the next page. I think it's on the next page. Maybe it's 318 and 319. Lines 318 and 319. Buyer's gonna pay this, seller's gonna pay that. We're gonna take these concessions, all as approved by buyer's lender. So the last person in the deal is not you, it's not the buyer, it's not the seller, it's not even the damn title company, it's the lender gets to determine that. So if they put $5,000 in concessions on that line right there, he's gonna take every bit of that if he can and apply it to his buyer's costs to offset him. So he may find all kinds of things, which is fine. You've already agreed to it. But it's not the title company, it's not you, it's not your seller, it's going to be the lender that determines that. Pardon me, on 320, it's a binding contract. State of Missouri has laws that says if you enter into a contract, it's binding. The federal government has laws that says if you enter into a contract, it's binding. The city of Springfield has laws. So it's a binding contract, period. If you enter into this contract, it binds or you are bound together with the seller. You can assign this contract. Guess how easy it is? There's an amendment. You'll see that amendment at some point. It's one page. And you fill out the buyer's name, the seller's name, the property name, all that. You put in there in the body of the deal, you put buyer to be James L. Boland. Everybody signs it, including James L. Boland. And now the property is transferred out of the name of the original buyer. And now all I've got to do is hold to the terms and conditions of the original contract. It's that simple. I bought a vineyard in Mount Vernon one time for the guy that owned the radio station because they wouldn't sell it to him. And then the day before closing, I assigned it to him and there's nothing they could do. It was already, all the transaction had been done. But you'll see this, or what they call, straw buyers for people like the O'Reillys. You can't put O'Reilly on a contract and the price, not go up on something sometimes. Same thing with the Hershens in Branson when I was down there. None of the stars that used to come to Branson when I was down there would buy in their name, they'd buy in something else. And then they might assign the property. But you could do the same thing. I always use the Jack Henry example. Got all those cubicles, right? So you sell a house to a Jack Henry guy, and then all of a sudden Jack Henry buys a house or buys a company in North Dakota and says, hey, you're transferred. And then he goes, uh-oh, I've got a house under contract. And your buddy in the next cubicle goes, I'll buy it. And you go, you will? Yeah. 1 page. Buddy, the next cubicle is now the buyer, everybody signs it, we just go on to closing, nothing changes. Okay, it's that simple. So don't get scared about that. Now, 1031 exchanges, if anybody ever says 1031 to you, don't do it unless you have a business background and have been involved in 1031 exchanges before. Have any of you ever done a 1031 exchange? This is what's called a stalker, STALKER exchange. And what it is it pushes taxes into the future. So I buy a duplex in Ozark and I buy it for 100,000 and I fix it up a little bit and the market changes and I've made it look pretty nice. Now my rents have doubled and I sell it for 200,000. I'm looking at $100,000 in capital gains. Right now, the tax would be 21% on that. 21% of 100,000 is 21,000. I wouldn't want to do that, would I? Give the federal government 21,000 because I worked hard and made a good buy and fixed this place up. So I'm going to do an exchange. I'm going to take my 200,000 and buy a property that's worth 201,000 or more that will bring me more income. And I'm going to keep pushing that into the future. It's called a like-kind exchange because you're exchanging investment property for investment property. But since you don't have a background in it, don't do it. Get a veteran realtor to work with you who knows what they're doing and an experienced title person. Call us. Call him, call me. Contract and any rider or attachment becomes a part of the contract. Yeah, that's right. Doesn't matter what it is on paragraph 12. If somebody's initialed or signed it, even if it's the MLS detail sheet, trust me, an attorney says that's part of the contract. The state says no, but the attorneys say everything. Paragraph 13, much as you don't want to talk about this, you should talk about this to your clients. You should say, look, if for some reason you wake up after we go under contract and say, you know, I'm not going to close on this property. You need to have a legitimate legal reason to do that. If you don't, you could be in default. And there's 3 things that happen, and all 3 of them are bad. One, the contract could be what's called specific performance. You know, you could have to do exactly what it says and then pay attorney's fees too. In other words, the court can force you to buy the house. 2, there could be damages charged against you. Or 3, the third one's the worst one. It's any remedy under the law, which is the bad one because you don't know what that is. I mean, if I'm the seller and you don't close on my house, I'm going straight to Eustasis and claiming mental damages. And then I'm going right across the street to Cox and say, well, my heart has been really bothering me. And those are the damages I'm going to tell my attorney about. In addition to the fact that I've made the repairs, I've moved out of the house, I've sold all my possessions, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I'm going after you, right? That's what could happen. It's the same whether you're the seller or the buyer, the penalties are the same. But you just tell your buyer, and I always ask my buyer, you're not going to default, are you? I wait for them to answer. It's okay. We're in agreement on that. And I tell them, if you even have this much of a thought, then you need to call an attorney. Don't call me. They will call me, but I want them to call an attorney, right? Because they need to get legal advice. Don't worry about the prevailing party stuff. That's fought out between the attorneys and the judges. On 15, seller's disclosure statement. You probably learned this in school, right? Do you have to have a seller's disclosure statement in the state of Missouri? Say no, you do not. It's not required. Right? You learned that in school. You don't have to have one. So if your seller says, I'm not filling one out, say fine. But I'd encourage you to fill out the first 4 items on here, which are lead-based paint, methamphetamines, dump site, and hazardous materials. Fill those out. Just fill that box in, initial it or something. And then we'll go to the second page. You can mark in there, I'm not making any further disclosures, and then sign it. We'll be done with it. I've got an attorney I work with. She told me, and I've already sold her 3 houses. She said, next house I sell, and I'm not filling out the disclosure sheet. I said, Catherine, you've lived there for 15 years now. She goes, I don't care. It's not required by law, I'm not doing it. Now, me, I'm filling out the disclosures. I'm gonna tell everybody everything I know, and then they're gonna do an inspection. And then they can't say, well, you didn't tell us about that, and why didn't I tell them? Because I didn't know, right? But that's up to you on that. Your buyer should read this disclosure sheet if there is one. If it doesn't say anything, so we're really gonna have to depend on the inspector for this. Okay? Hopefully you can check box A. You'll find this on the MLS detail when you pull up the property. You look at the top of the screen, you'll say documents. And you click on documents, there should be a drop down that says lead-based paint, seller's disclosures, maybe CRS, maybe some other material, plat map or something. You want your client to have all of those, but especially the disclosures. Now, I know you're young, right? Pretty young, kind of young. Some of this you really have to help your buyer through, right? You can't just send it to them and say, sign here. I mean, you should say, look, I want you to read the disclosures, and when you get through there, call me if there's a problem, but look at 15, whatever that is, okay? Because this concerns me a little bit. So when we get our inspection, we might want the inspector to pay close attention to this. Or B, seller agrees to provide this buyer with the seller's disclosure statement with 1 day if none stated, and then buyer has 3 days to review it. Now, listen to me from a different seat. Now you're the listing agent, okay? You've just listed this nice house, right? You go back to the office, you get it all put in the MLS, you got the pictures up, it looks good. You don't load up the disclosures. Somebody comes in that day, writes an offer and checks box B. 3 days from now, they say, we're terminating the contract after reviewing the disclosure. Because you didn't have it on the screen. You didn't have it in the detail. Now, I'd like to hear your speech when you explain that to the seller. That I was negligent in my job and I didn't put the disclosures online. And so I had to send them to them because they requested it in the offer and they reviewed it and they don't like some of that. It could say nothing. It could say a blank sheet of paper with just a signature on it, and they can terminate the contract within 3 days, but you won't know for 3 days. It's kind of like the buyer remorse paragraph. It's the same thing. You don't want to do that. So if it doesn't have a disclosure on there, a lot of times what I do is I'll call the agent and say, hey, you got any disclosures? He said, yeah. I said, well, we're considering writing an offer, so you really need to send those to me. And I'd suggest that you put them on the MLS, even if it doesn't say anything, because if not, B goes into play. And then C, those sellers' disclosure statement will be provided. Can you do that? Yes. Okay. And they don't even have to check the 4 boxes that are by statute, according to our attorneys.
So on 15, you're checking all 3 of those? Is that what I'm
No,
hearing?
you got to check whichever one happens. Did you find the disclosure online and give it to your clients and they read it? That's A. And then B,
Sure. Yeah, I got you. My
okay.
bad. My bad.
And then B, there wasn't a disclosure.
Yeah.
So now I want a copy of it and I've got 3 days to review it and I might terminate the contract and then C, there just wasn't one. Because the seller already told you, or the listing agent said, there's not going to be a seller's disclosure statement. Lead-based paint, have to have it. Your buyer has to sign it. When we do walk through, the utilities have to be on. They had to add this to the contract because a lot of the REO companies wouldn't turn them on. And it's just stupid. So now they have to turn them on. Now, in the old days, a lot of times what we do too as agents, we go to CU or the local company and put down money and get the utilities turned on so we could test everything before we close. You don't want to have to do that if you don't have to. If you're going to do a walkthrough, the best time to do it is when the house is vacant. Now, if it's an occupied property, it might not be vacant until the day of closing. But you still want to do it. Even if your buyers can't make a walkthrough, you probably want to walk through on the day of closing, have a look at it to see if there's anything that needs to be corrected. On signatures, what they're talking about here is you can sign it wet, you can sign it electronically, you can sign it by fax, and then I can sign it wet. And those signatures all count. That's basically what it's saying. On 19, we're seeing this so much that the laws of the state say that seller, even if there's 10 sellers, because the baby boomers are dying, the kids are inheriting the property, or 8 buyers, you just use the term seller and buyer. That's all that's whole thing, okay? On 20, notices should be in writing. They should be. I'm gonna show you something in a minute that's gonna crack you up though. And they should be delivered upon sending. They're considered delivered. So if I put something in my phone and say, here's the notice, bink, and I send it to you, because it's gone out of mine, it should be in yours, it's considered delivered. Here's why that came about. But 4 or 5 years ago, we had an agent from up north, Tammy Tucker, who's a really good agent, nice agent, wrote a contract on one of Dan Holt's houses. Dan countered it, and she goes, it looks good, you know, I'll get my buyer to sign it, and I will send it back to you, okay? So, it was a Saturday, and Tammy went to lunch with her family, and then she got him to sign it. Then she went to supper with her family, and next morning she went to church. She's big on church. She was there from early to late, and then had lunch after that. And then sent the signed counter to Dan. And Dan called her and said, I'm sorry, we received and accepted another offer yesterday. And she goes, yeah, but I had it signed yesterday. Doesn't matter. Unless you sent it, it doesn't exist. Okay? But I'm gonna show you where that's wrong too, according to this. But that's most of the time, that's what I would think. So if I get a counter, or if I've got an offer, or I've got somebody accepted it, I mean, first thing I'm doing is texting them, and we've got an accepted contract, and I'm calling them, we got an accepted contract. I don't care if they answer or not. And I'm emailing them, we've got an accepted contract. I mean, they're not gonna tell me, I didn't get it. I mean, they got something I know. All right, here's all the riders we had. If we've got a house to close on 425, that's contingency for closing. Got one to sell, that's 426. If it's any kind of government loan on 427, and then if we're getting a survey, that's 429. 432 says, look, hey, I hate to tell you this contract's not any good with new construction, and it's not. The best thing it can do for new construction is establish the price. So you might use it to write, you know, the contract to establish the price, which is typically going to be full price. And then in special agreements, you'd want to write, if it's new construction, all parties agree that the buyer and the builder to meet within 5 days or whatever to come to agreement on all choices for finishes, flooring, roof, everything with the house. Most builders already have a list that you can look at, but typically they don't go sit down with you in that list until you under contract. If you are kin to somebody or you're buying the house, you gotta tell them. MREC wants you to tell that. They think you've got an advantage. Your sources of broker compensation. Look, I'm telling you right now, if you're gonna write an offer on a house, you need to call the other agent, see if there's compensation. And then you're going to include that compensation rider that Nicole gave you, and you're going to check the box. If they say, yes, there is compensation and it's 3%, you're going to check box 1A1. Okay? Because they've already told you that there's compensation. And you're going to put in there whatever they tell you. Hopefully it's 3%. Okay? Now, let's say you got a buyer's agency agreement with your client, and you've already got in their agreement, they're gonna pay you 3% if you can't collect it. And the listing agent says, we're only paying 2%. You could put 2% in blank 1, and then check the box on 2 and put 1%. So then you still get your total 3%. If the seller signs it and agrees to it, you're getting it. I don't like working for less than 3%. I'll just tell you that. I mean, it's just me. You know, it's a really tough job anyway. So I try to get that every time I can. And the last year, we've had it cut one time and we just accepted it, you know. But I don't like it. I mean, I think our value's there, right? So first calls to who? Listing agent, ask the question, is there compensation? How much? It's not enough to say, is there compensation, right? Because you go, oh, yeah. And then it's 1%, you know? So you want to know how much it is. That will tell you what you have to put into this. And you tell your buyer why you're doing that. Because, you know, Mr. Buyer, if you look at our contract, it says I'm gonna do everything I can to collect this from the seller or from some other source. So that's what you're trying to do. So blank one, I know I'm getting 2%. The seller's already agreed to that. Now, blank two, I'm asking the seller for that additional 1% to be paid out of his proceeds. So in that case, on 24, line 450, unless you've got an admin fee you're charging the buyers or a buyer's agent fee, which a lot of buyer's agents do, you'd mark the box only seller. Now, if your buyer is going to have to pay part of the compensation, you need to mark the box buyer because this is MREC rules. And then on 452, it says buyer is requesting seller pay compensation to or broker assisting seller shares compensation with the broker assisting buyer closing. And then you got the compensation rider. So you're gonna be checking that box every time, aren't you? You do want to get paid, believe me. All right, on the brokerage relationship, if you are representing the buyer and you're at Keller Williams, you check 464 and you check 470. You're a seller or buyer's limited agent and you are a designated agent. Okay? Designated agency means that even though the brokerage is representing your client as a whole, you're the only one we've assigned. You're designated to represent that client. So I don't know anything about well, as a broker, I'm supposed to know something about your client, but none of the other agents do. It's just you. That's what the designated agency is all about. There's an office here in town, I think it's AMAX, that still don't practice designated agency, which means that if you have a buyer's agency agreement, then everybody has a buyer's agency agreement. If you have a seller's agency agreement, then everybody has a seller. I mean, it's just not a good idea, but we can't convince that broker that. All right, on 479, you can be Keller Williams Realty, you can be Keller Williams, you can be Greater Springfield Realty LLC. That's a brokerage that's assisting the buyer. That's you. Your brokerage firm state license number is found online on the MLS or on if you've got any listings, you'll see it on there too. Or you can go to anybody else's listings at the Keller Williams agent, you'll see that number. It's 2023 something. You can put it in your phone if you're smart. I'm not smart, I look it up every time. Then you sign it, and then your licensee's printed name, that's you. And then your license number. You should memorize that number. You got it memorized already?
I keep it in my phone.
0323531. I got mine. So you need to memorize yours. I mean, really, you're gonna need it in a lot of different places as you go through your life. And this is the license number from the MREC. The number that you get from the MLS is the NERDS number. That's the National Real Estate Database System number. That's not that number. We are a franchise on 486. This has been moved from the old contract. The reason I slowed down there a minute for just a second is this allows access for the inspector, the appraiser, for really anybody that needs to get into the property is allowed under this paragraph. It also goes on to say that in the broker's role in this, we have no liability. You have no liability. Unless you hire an engineer and pay that engineer to do some work on the house, then you have liability. If you were to hire the inspector and pay the inspector yourself, you'd have liability for the things they do. So you don't have any liability just by calling an inspector and say, hey, look, let's get out here and inspect this house. And then last of all, we are a franchise. Keller Williams is a national franchise. Actually, the largest one in the United States, actually, largest one in the world. And then you see on 504, it repeats it. Under Missouri law, brokers are immune from liability for statements made by anybody else unless you hire them. 27 says, look, we're gonna send this information to the MLS. We're trying to figure out what the market value of properties are. That's why we do it. There's a lot of people don't like to share their sales data, but we share it with them, but we don't share it with the government. So when you buy a house or I buy a house, or your buyer buys a house, the government doesn't know. They don't have a clue what you paid for it. On 28 and 29, that's not your job. You're not supposed to be looking for terrorists or anything else. What you should do is let the title company figure that out on 28 and 29. Okay? On 30, I say 24 hours on most of these when you're sending it off to get accepted by the buyer or by the seller. But listen, I look at it this way too. I want you to think about it before you do that with your clients. So I call to set up an appointment to show the house. It's an occupied property. And my client says, well, or the seller says, hey, look, give them a couple hours because they're gonna have to get the kids and the dogs and all that. I'm like, great, no problem. So then I go over and show the house. My clients love it. So we go back to the office, we write up the offer. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I might put 9 p.m. on that. Why? The buyers are both in the house. So are the kids and the dogs. They got a sign that says they want to sell. I got a buyer that wants to buy. I don't have to wait 24 hours. Now, they might not like that and they may counter it. That's fine. Point is, you know, in a competitive market, you want to get it done. But if your buyers really want that house, you don't want to sit there 24 hours waiting for it. And the agents don't like it. They'll never like it when you put that short acceptance time. But you can just say, this is what my broker said. Nobody likes me anyway, so it's okay, you know. But I mean, I like that. Now, you can also talk to the other. I mean, how long do you think it's going to take to get a response? If it's a vacant house, those people could be scattered all wherever, so we don't know. So have that conversation. If it's an REO property, which we have less than 1/2 of 1% now, you can't put an expiration date because it'll never expire. Okay? Seller or buyer will sign on the left side. And if there's one signature, if there's two signatures, and then, like I said, now a lot of times we're getting a whole bunch of them because of the baby boomers, and there might be 3 or 4 buyers. Investment properties, there could be multiple buyers too. And then what you're going to get back is either a signed offer from the seller or the seller is going to reject the offer. Now, go back up to on the acceptance deadline. I want you to look at line 534. Okay, you're representing the buyer. This offer is freely revocable by buyer by providing notice, whether orally or in writing, to seller or the licensee assisting seller until seller has accepted it. Got that? I mean, it happens where your buyer goes, hey, you know what? We've changed our mind. We don't want to buy this. And you go on in, we'll be done in a minute. And the buyer goes, I've changed my mind. Okay, I immediately text, call, and email and say, we're withdrawing our offer. Because look at the next sentence. Once seller has accepted it, both signing it, so he's got to sign it first, and providing timely notice of such acceptance. Now look, here's where it gets crazy, whether orally or in writing. So if I represent the seller and you sent me an offer and I say, I call you and I go, hey, good job. My seller signed this. I'll get a copy to you as soon as I can. It's done. But if I haven't called, whether they signed it or not, and you haven't been noticed, I can revoke or withdraw that offer anytime up to notification. Remember up above, we said everything in writing, everything in writing, everything in writing. This is the only place where it says by providing timely notice of such acceptance, whether orally or in writing. So keep that in mind. You don't ever want your buyer to withdraw, right? Yeah,
Never.
never. And it has never happened either, but it might.
We have our team meeting at 3.
I know we're
Is
done.
that okay? Okay.
I just finished.
Sure.
Hey, look, I timed it perfectly.
You did. You did.
Well,
You
I just
did
want to
good
make
job.
minutes early. Yeah.
Make sure.
Oh, you
Compensation.
were back
range.
here. Hi.
Hi. That's where you've been with my.
Yeah, I mean, normally we go through some of the other documents, but we had to be done because these guys are more important than we are.
Hey, I learned,
I would, was it notice in writing?
Make everyone walk.
I would suggest too, that if you get a chance to take Don's classes, any of them, or you want to, like he's been here a million times, you know the contract better than I do. But take them. It'll be to your advantage. We're done.
what on?
Come on.
Hey,
How are you?
I'm good. What's
Where do
up?
you guys want to?
Oh, I was just teaching. I'm getting out of here because I've been thrown out.
Thank you, Jim, for teaching contracts. We appreciate you. It's important. An important class. We're having our Christmas party.
Are you really?
Yeah.
I called it a team meeting.
Cool for you.
And our team meeting, but yeah.
And your team meeting, that's what she said, yeah, team meeting. Said Christmas party, say, hey, thanks a lot for coming.
It seemed like you were in a full-blown teaching moment, so I was like, I don't know.
See ya. All right, I'm out of here. Leave that up and shut it off if you want. I don't know how to do it.
out. I'll shut it out.
Ben?
How you doing? You, Jim, Adam brought you.
Good. I'm illegal now.
Candy.
How's it going?
Well, it's something.
They all come into.
It's only